This is Mr. Wesley, and what I am about to tell you is not comfortable, is not flattering to anyone involved, and is supported by more than 5 decades of consistent cross-cultural research that has been producing the same finding regardless of which country the study was conducted in, which decade it was published, or which methodology the researchers used to collect the data. Men, across virtually every culture and demographic that has been studied, prefer younger women as romantic partners, not slightly younger, significantly younger. And the preference does not diminish meaningfully as men age. A man at 60 has a stated and revealed preference for a partner who is, on average, significantly younger than he is. A preference that is considerably more age asymmetric than the equivalent preference of women at the same age. The man at 60 is not primarily drawn to the woman who shares his exact life stage, his exact physical age, his exact proximity to retirement. He is drawn to signals of youth and fertility that his nervous system is reading as attractive, regardless of what his conscious mind has decided about what is appropriate or fair or intellectually consistent with his stated values about equality and age. I want to be very clear about 2 things before we go any further. The first is that understanding this biological mechanism is not the same as endorsing it, celebrating it, or treating it as a license for any particular behavior. The mechanism is real. What any individual does with the knowledge of it is a separate and entirely personal question. The second is that the mechanism I am going to describe today is precisely as uncomfortable for the men listening to it as it is for the women. If you are a man over 50 who is dating and you are being honest with yourself about your own attraction patterns, you will recognize what I am describing. If you are a woman over 50 navigating the post-divorce dating landscape, you will recognize it from the other side. Both recognitions are uncomfortable, both are useful. Let me give you the mechanism with the precision it deserves. The foundational research on male mate preference across age is not recent. It begins with the work of evolutionary psychologist David Buss, whose landmark 1989 study examined mate preferences across 37 cultures on 6 continents and found, with a consistency that surprised even the researchers who conducted it, that men across virtually every culture studied preferred younger women as romantic partners, and that women across virtually every culture studied preferred older men. The study has been replicated, challenged, extended, and refined across the subsequent 3 decades, and its core finding has not changed in any meaningful way, despite the most sophisticated methodological challenges that the field of evolutionary psychology has produced. The mechanism behind the finding is the one that evolutionary psychologists have been building the case for across those same decades, and it is the mechanism I want you to understand precisely rather than simply assert, because the precision is what makes it genuinely useful. Human beings evolved across hundreds of thousands of years in environments where reproductive success was the primary and non-negotiable driver of genetic survival. The physical characteristics that signal female reproductive viability, youth, physical symmetry, specific hormonal markers visible in skin quality and body composition, the particular constellation of features that the research has identified as universally attractive across cultures, are characteristics that correlate strongly with fertility, with the biological capacity to carry a pregnancy successfully, with the health indicators that matter most to the survival of offspring. The male nervous system, shaped by evolutionary pressures across those hundreds of thousands of years, became specifically and sensitively calibrated to detect and respond to those signals with attraction. That calibration does not update itself to reflect the contemporary reality that most men in developed countries are not actually trying to reproduce in their 50s and 60s. It does not update itself to reflect the man's conscious understanding that a woman's fertility is not his primary concern in a post-divorce relationship at 62. It runs the same program it has been running since before the species developed language, which is to allocate attraction in the direction of the signals that correlate with reproductive viability, because that allocation, across the evolutionary environment in which it was built, was the allocation that produced the most successful offspring. The result is the pattern that the research has been documenting consistently for decades. A man at 55, when surveyed about his romantic preferences, or when his behavior in the contemporary dating marketplace is observed and analyzed, shows a stated and revealed preference for women who are significantly younger than he is. The preference does not require conscious awareness of its evolutionary origins to operate. It does not require the man to be thinking about reproduction or fertility. It simply runs beneath the level of conscious decision-making as the baseline toward which his attraction is automatically oriented before his conscious mind has weighed in on the question. Here's the part that makes this research genuinely uncomfortable for men to sit with honestly, and I want to give it to you directly because honest discomfort is considerably more useful than comfortable evasion. The preference for younger women that the research documents is not, in many cases, producing better relationships for the men who act on it. The woman who is significantly younger than the man she is partnered with does not, on average, share his cultural reference points, his life stage concerns, his proximity to the specific questions of aging and legacy and mortality that become increasingly central to a man's interior life past 50. The attraction that drew him to her was real, and it was biological, and it was not irrational in the specific sense that biological responses to real signals are not irrational. But the relationship built on the foundation of that attraction alone, without the shared life stage and the shared set of concerns that produce genuine long-term compatibility, is not, on average, the relationship that produces the best long-term outcomes for either person inside it. The research on relationship satisfaction and age gaps in heterosexual partnerships is complicated and contested in its details, but its broad contours are consistent enough to be worth noting. Couples with very large age gaps, 10 years or more, report higher initial relationship satisfaction and lower long-term relationship stability than couples with smaller age differences. The initial satisfaction reflects the real biological attraction on the male side and the real social and economic attraction on the female side, both of which are genuine and not to be dismissed as shallow. The lower long-term stability reflects the equally real and eventually unavoidable reality that two people at very different life stages are going to diverge in their needs, their concerns, and their trajectories in ways that the initial attraction cannot fully compensate for. Picture this. There is a man I know, I will call him Arthur, who was 58 when his 26-year marriage ended. Arthur was, by any objective measure, an attractive prospect in the post-divorce dating marketplace, financially stable, physically healthy, emotionally more developed than he had been inside the marriage, and genuinely interested in building something real rather than simply filling the space the marriage had left. He began dating, and he found, with some surprise at his own responses, that his attention was consistently and almost automatically drawn toward women who were considerably younger than he was. Not exclusively, not with any deliberate strategy behind it, simply as the default orientation of his own attraction before his conscious preferences had time to weigh in. He dated 2 women in their late 30s in the first 2 years after his divorce. Both relationships were genuinely enjoyable in specific and real ways. Both eventually encountered the same specific limitation, the point at which the life stage divergence became impossible to navigate. She wanted children. He had 3 adult children and no interest in starting again. She had decades of career ambition ahead of her that was going to shape her life in ways that his life, approaching its final professional chapter, was not going to be shaped by. The things they wanted from the next 20 years of their lives were simply not the same things, in ways that the initial attraction had been too strong to make visible until the relationship had developed far enough for the divergence to matter. Arthur told me that the experience of dating significantly younger women had taught him something about his own attraction that he found genuinely uncomfortable to acknowledge, that the initial pull he felt toward them was real and biological, and not something he could simply decide to override through an act of will, and that the outcomes that pull produced were consistently less satisfying than the relationships he could imagine building with women who were closer to his own life stage. He was attracted to the signal and less suited to the reality. And the gap between those two things, between what his nervous system was automatically drawn to and what actually produced genuine compatibility and sustained satisfaction, was the gap the evolutionary mechanism had never been designed to close. Here is what I want to give you that is actually practically useful, because the research finding on its own, however honestly delivered, is not enough. Understanding that male attraction is biologically calibrated toward youth and fertility signals is interesting and true and insufficient if it is not connected to something a man can actually do with that understanding in the specific and practical context of his own post-divorce dating life. The first practical implication is the most important. The biological pull is real, and it is not something to be ashamed of, but it is also not the totality of what determines genuine compatibility and genuine long-term satisfaction. A man over 50 who treats his initial attraction response as the primary and sufficient guide to partner selection is a man who is outsourcing the most consequential decision available to him in the post-divorce years to a biological system that was calibrated for an environment that no longer exists, and for a set of concerns that are not actually his primary concerns in this chapter of his life. The initial attraction is real information. It is not complete information. The second practical implication is specifically for the women listening to this. The biological mechanism I have described is not a judgment on your worth. It is not a verdict on your value as a person or as a partner. It is a description of how the male nervous system allocates initial attraction, and the initial attraction is the most primitive and least accurate predictor of relationship quality available. The men who build the most satisfying relationships in the post-divorce years, the ones whose outcomes the research identifies as genuinely good across the long term, are almost universally the men who learn to look past the initial biological signal toward the deeper and more durable indicators of genuine compatibility. Shared values, shared life stage, shared understanding of what the next chapter of a life is actually for. Those indicators are not sexy in the way that the initial biological attraction is sexy. They are the things that determine whether a relationship is still working at 5 years and 10 years, when the initial attraction has settled into whatever it is going to settle into. The third practical implication is the one that I think matters most for men over 50 who are navigating the post-divorce dating landscape with genuine seriousness and genuine intention. The biological preference for younger women is real. The dating marketplace's response to that preference, the way it structures itself around male preferences that are themselves structured around biological signals that do not perfectly align with contemporary post-reproductive relationship goals, is also real. And the man who understands both of those things clearly is the man who can navigate that marketplace with the specific and honest awareness that his nervous system's initial allocations of attention are going to require his conscious mind's active and thoughtful participation if the outcome is going to be one he actually wants, rather than simply one his biology pointed him toward. The brutal reason men do not date older women is not, at its foundation, anything as simple as shallowness or vanity, or the culturally conditioned preference for youth that popular critiques tend to focus on. It is older and more specific than any of those explanations. It is a biological calibration, built across evolutionary timescales, for an environment that no longer exists, running its original program inside a world it was not designed for. Understanding it precisely changes nothing about the mechanism. It changes everything about what a man does with the mechanism's outputs. Drop a comment. Men, have you found yourself in the post-divorce dating years drawn towards significantly younger women in ways that surprised you? And women, have you experienced the specific dynamic this video describes in the contemporary dating landscape? And what has been your response to it? Subscribe to Real Talk Relationships. Every week, Mr. Wesley breaks down the real mechanisms driving men's relationships and the post-divorce dating landscape, with the honesty and the precision that finally makes the patterns legible rather than simply frustrating.